All right, Todd Adams, come forward.
All right, let me make my way through here. It is good to be with you all this morning. As it mentions in the bulletin, I have the privilege of serving as the 9th Chief Executive of the Pension Fund of the Christian Church. So in 124 years, I've only had 8 predecessors. And we began with a simple offering of $2,700 to benefit a veteran from the Civil War, a widow who was blind as a result of her service. I'm going to end up knocking this over. And her 4 orphan children when her husband, the Reverend Ira Chase, passed away. And from that $2,700, we managed today $3.25 billion in retirement assets for 14,000 pastors and church workers throughout the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. So it is our privilege to serve on behalf of all of the pastors and your staff here. It's also my privilege to be with you all this morning. I was here for Nick's wedding in December, and John mentioned that they were trying to do this family cruise and be gone for a couple of weeks. And I said, well, I'll come and fill the pulpit for you one of those Sundays. And so it's good to be with you all here. John and I served together in Houston. I was the senior minister at Memorial Drive Christian Church, and we'll share a little bit about that ministry with you all this morning. My day began today, though, bright and early with a text from Miguel Morales. Miguel is the general pastor of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Puerto Rico. Following the devastation of Hurricane Maria, Pension Fund, through ministerial relief and assistance, provided over $375,000 in financial support to our pastors there in the rebuilding of the island. We also provided, as part of that, 100 generators. So when FEMA couldn't get gas and food into the ports, the church was able to secure, ship, and deliver 100 generators that some are still in use today, but got them to our brothers and sisters on the island so that they could begin to power the churches, they could power their ice makers, and they could begin to serve their communities. But Miguel sent me a text this morning with a picture of one of the generators that is still in use. And he was preaching this morning his 20th sermon to what he said was the hum of a pension fund provided generator. His note reminded me, though, this morning that in the face of the hatred that we have seen in our world this last week, with violence claiming senselessly 50 lives in New Zealand in the mosque, by a white nationalist who admits he was inspired by our president, that ultimately, if we are true to who God has called us to be, love will win out. That love will win out, and that we have the opportunity to have a lasting impact on people in this world, and that we must always, in the end, choose love, because hate is too great of a burden to bear. We live in a world today, it seems like, where we're constantly forced into making choices to be one or the other. We're put into these buckets and these boundaries, stereotypes that if you're this, then you must be that, or if you are this, you can't possibly believe or think that. We're actually programmed, I think, at an early age to learn to choose sides. If you remember back to your days on the playground, Red Rover, or choosing sides for kickball, were the easy ways to identify those who were, the physically coordinated against, let's say, the not so physically coordinated. I can remember in the early 70s growing up in Tulsa, going to, anybody remember this, TGNY? Yes. Or the IGA near our house, and participating in a choice where we were expected to be one or the other. Anybody remember the Pepsi challenge? Now, we were a Coke household growing up. Pepsi was not allowed to cross the front door, but I can remember in the store thinking how cool it was as a kid that I wasn't allowed to have soda at home, but I was sneaking these little shots of Pepsi versus Coke and getting to have something that I wasn't allowed to have at home. But they wanted you to choose and be loyal to one or the other. Of course, there are lots of dichotomies in our lives where we're forced into one or the other. Growing up in Tulsa, my family couldn't imagine living in Oklahoma City. And my family that lives in Oklahoma City can't imagine why anybody would ever want to live in Tulsa. Taco Bueno? Taco Mayo? Brahms or Whataburger, red or blue in your political beliefs, liberal or conservative, pro-life or pro-choice? Or how about Boomer Sooner versus Ride 'em Cowboys? I'll show you my loyalty there. But, whoa. But in the church, we use this brief encounter with Jesus on his way to the cross at the home of Martha to define two types of Christians that we typically are forced to identify. Are you a Mary or are you a Martha? As Jesus and his disciples were on his way to the village, he came to a village where a woman named Martha had opened her home to him. She had a sister who was called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all of the preparations she had to make. She came to him and she asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all of the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but the one thing that is needed, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." In the church, we tend to stereotype people, Marys or Marthas, the studious ones sitting at the feet of Jesus, or the worker bees who are always busy making sure things are happening. Mary, the studious one, she's our regular attendee to Bible study and to Sunday school, never misses a Sunday morning, and if she does, well, you know something is wrong. For Mary, faith is the opportunity to sit at the feet of Jesus and to learn. Faith is a noun, something you know. The Marys of the world, faith for these Christians is about the strong belief in God and in the doctrines of the faith. They know their Jesus through the study of the Word. But then there's Martha, the doer, the hostess with the mostest, the counter on Sunday morning, tending to every detail, ensuring that the food is prepped, that the house is ready. There's a guest who must be entertained. For the Marthas of the world, faith is a verb, something you do. It is a way in which you live or you serve. They know their Jesus by getting their hands dirty, by lifting their voices, by putting on their aprons, by welcoming the stranger. They are the busy people of the church. And we all know if you want something done, ask a busy person. Jesus, in his response to Martha's complaint, I don't believe is saying that doing or acting or engaging in this way isn't important. But he's saying, while I am here, sit and listen and learn and let the Word made flesh inform your action. Don't choose. It'll be a little bit of both. Gus Marks was a member at Memorial Drive in Houston where John and I served together, and he was a both-and kind of guy. Now, if you saw him around the church, you would assume that he was a Martha. After all, there was never a moment that something wasn't broken. A toilet, a boiler, a fence post, a sprinkler head, a water fountain, whatever it might be, if it broke, Gus was there to fix it. On Sunday mornings, I don't know that he ever stepped foot into the sanctuary. He was always on the go, making sure that the communion trays were filled properly, that there was an extra tray in the back to receive the offering and walk with the deacon to secure it in the office, to make sure that the parking lot was checked. I don't recall a single Sunday of Gus ever sitting through a sermon. And he also, by the way, made the most beautiful scratched lattice apple pie I have ever had, and the best darn chocolate chip cookies. Just don't tell my mother that. But for never sitting through a service on Sunday morning, Gus always had a comment on Monday morning about the sermon. Even though it appeared he was a Martha, always busy and doing, he was also a Mary. And the reality is, as a community faith, we need our Marys and our Marthas and our Gus's, but we don't have to choose one or the other. We don't have to force ourselves into a set understanding as to what it means to be a person of faith, but we should engage with all that we are and all that we have and listen and grow and live and love and serve, because the more we learn, the more we should be called to do. And the more we do and engage with our faith, the more our faith comes alive and the more we understand and the more we know. And it's this cycle that we continue to learn and to know and to do and to learn and to know and to do. And in order for the church to flourish, for the gospel to be proclaimed, we must understand faith as both a noun and a verb. We must know our faith and let it compel us to action. But we must allow our action to compel us deeper into the understanding of our faith. We had a couple of other members of the church there, Shirley and Virginia. They came to visit one Sunday late in life. They were upset with the church that they had been longtime members of, and so they decided to darken the doors of Memorial Drive. And when they introduced themselves to me, almost simultaneously as these old maid sisters lived together, they said, "And by the way, we are officially here, and we are the Frozen Chosen, and in the name of the great hymn of the church, we shall not be moved. And if you're okay with that, we'll think about joining your church." Okay? For Virginia and Shirley, everything was about set and routine. Every Friday morning was a 7 a.m. and an 8 a.m. wash-in set at the beauty shop. I think they used enough spray net to create their own hole in the ozone. Sundays were for perfectly ironed, pleated skirts, their nice little pocketbooks, and their very sensible shoes. But one day I went to go visit with them at the house, and they said, "So preacher," which always usually meant I was in trouble with them, "I understand we're doing something with some homeless teenagers, and we want to know what you're doing about it." So I went on to explain that we were working with about 100 homeless teens on the street, and we were feeding them meatball sandwiches twice a week. When the mobile medical clinic from the Episcopal Church would arrive, these young adults would gather, and they were from ages 12 to 18, and some of them had children of their own living on the streets. And we were doing some work with them. We had adopted a couple of them and gotten them into vocational training, gotten some of them off of the streets. And they said, "Well, we want to come," without a smile. And so I said, "Well, all right, here's when we meet." And they showed up dressed as they would be on Sunday morning with their little clutch purses. And they looked like they were absolutely petrified. They stood off to the side. They would not engage with anyone. They didn't talk to any of the teens. They were almost shaking. But the Frozen Chosen were melting just a little bit. And I was shocked. They showed up the next night. We were going out to feed as well. And the next week, and the next week, and the next week. But I noticed these little clutch purses that they always carried suddenly were bigger bags, and bigger bags, and bigger bags. So I kind of watched from a distance what they were doing. Well, Kelly, whose street name was Black Rose, was kind of the mother of this community that we were serving and feeding every week. And I noticed that Virginia and Shirley would kind of slide off to the side just a little bit, and Black Rose would come around the corner of the van, and they would open this bag. So I watched what they were doing, and it turns out that the Frozen Chosen were actually buying shoes every week for the homeless teens. And Kelly was distributing them and letting them know who needed shoes for the next week. But they didn't want anybody to know, because they didn't want their image of who they were as these Marys of the church who were only about understanding their faith. They didn't want anybody to think they were melting a little bit. You see, my friends, the people we encounter today on the way to the cross, they give us this insight into the Christian faith, that rather than being either or, we should be a both and kind of people. But the more we sit at the feet of Jesus and the more we learn and study and grow in our faith, the more it should compel us to extend hospitality, that radical welcome of the stranger in the world, to do for the one who is in need, to repair more bicycles for those who need them as transportations, to give of ourselves in a sacrificial way to make the world a better place, or to do as John Wesley said, to do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways that you can, in all the places that you can, at all the times you can, for all the people that you can, for as long as you can. Do, my friends, all the good you can, by all the means you can, hear this again, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, for as long as you can. Mary and Martha compel us on the way to the cross to learn, to grow, but also to live out our faith. My friends, in Acts 2:42, we find these words of the early disciples that they committed themselves to these very principles, to the study, to prayer, to fellowship, and to service. And as a result, that early church grew and flourished. So let us, wherever we are on the road to the cross, find ourselves as a people who have made the choice to be both Mary and Martha, that we too might journey to the cross with Jesus. Amen.